The German gunner saw the British soldier stand up behind a rock and almost ignored him. He was not carrying a Bren gun. He was not setting up a proper mortar. There was no base plate, no tripod, no crew waiting beside him with ammunition boxes. Just one man crouched in the heat west of El Alamein, holding what looked like a short piece of pipe. Then the pipe made a soft sound, not a crack, not a blast, a small, hollow cough. The German section kept moving for one more second, because nothing about that sound felt dangerous. Then the bomb came down behind them. It did not come flat. It did not come from the direction of the British rifles. It dropped almost vertically into the dead ground, where the Germans had thought they were safe. Men went down in a place their own training had told them could not be reached by a platoon weapon. And before the survivors understood the first explosion, smoke began to crawl across the desert. Not from artillery, not from a planned barrage, from the same little pipe. That was the part the Germans struggled to explain. They were not being beaten by a bigger gun. They were being beaten by a decision the British had made years earlier. A decision about where power should live. At the start of the war, every army understood the infantry problem. A platoon meets resistance. The enemy is behind a wall, a fold in the ground, a sunken road, a ridge, a hedge, a stone house, a place rifles cannot reach. The platoon commander needs fire on that position. So he asks for it. He sends the request upward. Company passes it along. Battalion decides what is available. The artillery must be contacted. The target must be described. The guns must be free. The observer must be able to see. And in that chain of delay, war does what war always does. The target moves. The radio fails. The smoke is needed somewhere else. The platoon is already pinned. The chance is gone. British planners understood that problem because they had watched it happen again and again. So they did something that looked almost lazy from the outside. They did not build a perfect mortar. They built a tool simple enough to live inside a platoon. The British 2-inch mortar was roughly a 10-pound tube. A soldier could carry it with ammunition and still move with the section. It had no complicated mount in the way German observers expected. It used a fixed firing pin. Drop the round in, aim the tube, fire. The aiming system could be as crude as a painted line. That was not an accident. That was the whole idea. A weapon with perfect range tables but trapped higher up the command chain was not always present when the platoon needed it. A rough little tube in the hand of a trained infantryman was present immediately, and immediate mattered. The German army had a light mortar too. It was a more respectable object. It looked like a mortar should look. Proper base plate, bipod, sights, a crew, a place in the company structure. By conventional standards, that German weapon made more sense. But conventional standards were exactly the trap, because the British weapon was not trying to win an engineering contest. It was trying to remove permission from the battlefield. That difference followed British and Commonwealth infantry everywhere they fought. In North Africa, the desert was not as empty as maps made it look. The ground folded and broke. Rocks, wadis, shallow rises, and little pockets of dead ground gave machine guns places to hide. A German gun placed well behind a ridge could punish anything crossing open sand. A rifle could not hit it. A Bren gun could not see it. A platoon commander could wait for support, or he could point to the man with the tube. A smoke round would rise, hang for a breath in the white sky, and burst where the enemy expected to keep his view. A clear field of fire became a gray wall. German gunners who had watched every yard of open desert suddenly watched nothing. And in those seconds, men crossed ground that should have killed them. The weapon did not need to be elegant. It needed to arrive before fear locked the platoon in place. That is why German reports from the desert often sounded confused. Their soldiers described British infantry hitting positions that should have required heavier support. They described fire arriving too quickly. They described a weapon that looked too small to explain what it was doing. From a desk, those reports could look exaggerated. From a foxhole, they were simple. The British platoon had brought its own answer. When the war moved into Italy, the little mortar became even harder to dismiss. Italy punished infantry in a different way. Villages sat on hills, lanes twisted between stone walls, ridges folded into ridges. A machine gun could sit on the far side of a slope and be completely invisible to the men it was stopping. Artillery could be devastating there, but it was not always available. Radios failed in valleys. Observation was blocked by mountains and buildings. Units became separated. Platoons found themselves fighting one corner, one terrace, one doorway at a time. And the 2-inch mortar fit that kind of war. It could not demolish a monastery. It could not smash a fortified hill town by itself. But it could drop a bomb into a courtyard. It could put smoke across a street. It could send high explosive over a wall that every direct fire weapon had to stare at helplessly. That was the strange power of the thing. It made a platoon dangerous in places where a platoon was supposed to be blind. A British or Canadian commander clearing a stone village did not have to turn every corner naked. He could blind the next window. He could force the next gun crew down. He could move men while the enemy was still trying to recover its sight. Not safely. Nothing about that war was safe. But with one more choice in his own hands. Then came Normandy. The Bocage looked like farmland until men had to fight through it. The hedgerows were not decorative bushes. They were earthen banks packed with roots, timber, and centuries of growth. A field boundary became a wall. A corner became a firing position. A German section on the far side could be 20 yards away and completely unreachable by anything fired in a straight line. In that country, the 2-inch mortar did not have to destroy the hedge. It only had to clear it. A bomb rising from one side and dropping on the other could turn a hidden position into a place no one wanted to keep his head up. Smoke could blind the corner. High explosive could force the defenders down. A section could move across the field before the opening closed. It was not glamorous. It was not decisive by itself. It was not the weapon people put at the center of war posters. But the Bocage was not won only by the famous machines. It was also fought yard by men carrying ugly little answers to ugly little problems. And the 2-inch mortar was one of those answers. Its darkest proof came far from Europe, in Burma. On January 31, 1945, at Hill 170 in the Arakan, British commandos were holding ground against repeated Japanese attacks. Lieutenant George Noland of No. 1 Commando moved under fire, used rifle and grenades, and fought at ranges where the next few seconds decided whether his men would be overrun. At one point, with Japanese troops closing in, Noland used a 2-inch mortar at extreme close range to break the assault before it reached the position. Think about what that means. A weapon designed to give a platoon immediate indirect fire was being used almost like a last shield in a fight that had lost all distance. The tube was not powerful in the way a field gun was powerful. It was powerful because it was there. Because a young officer did not have to ask anyone higher up for the one thing his men needed in that instant. Noland was killed that day. He was awarded the Victoria Cross. And buried inside that act of courage was the same design argument the British had made before the war. When the moment becomes too small and too fast for a command system, the front line still needs power. By 1945, the Germans no longer needed persuading that the British tube was real. They had met it in sand, mud, stone, rain, and jungle. They had seen smoke appear with no warning. They had seen bombs fall behind cover that should have protected them. They had seen Commonwealth platoons move with a kind of built-in fire support that did not wait for the larger machine to wake up. But their early disbelief matters, because it reveals the deeper mistake. The Germans did not dismiss the 2-inch mortar because they were stupid. They dismissed it because it violated their picture of what serious military capability looked like. Serious weapons had mounts. They had crews. They had sights. They had tables. They had a place in the hierarchy. The British tube looked like the opposite of seriousness. No beauty, no complexity, no obvious authority. Just a soldier, a few bombs, and a platoon commander close enough to see the problem with his own eyes. That was the hidden mechanism. The 2-inch mortar did not make British infantry invincible. It did not replace artillery. It did not always work perfectly. Its range was limited. Its accuracy depended on the soldier using it. Its bombs were small. But it changed what a platoon could attempt before help arrived. It changed how quickly smoke could appear. It changed whether dead ground stayed safe. It changed whether a reverse slope was a refuge or just another target. It changed whether a machine gun had minutes to dominate a field, or seconds before its world turned white. And because British Commonwealth Doctrine put that capability down at platoon level, the effect was multiplied across thousands of small fights. Australian infantry carried it. Canadian infantry carried it. New Zealand and Indian Army platoons carried it. British units carried it from the fall of France to the end of the war. It was not a special trick issued to a few experts. It was ordinary. That is why it mattered. Armies often prefer power that can be organized from above. It feels efficient. It feels controllable. It fits on charts. It allows commanders to mass effects where they are most needed. But the battlefield is full of moments too small for charts. A wall, a ditch, a window, a hedge, a machine gun just beyond sight. A platoon commander with 10 seconds to decide whether his men move or stay pinned until the enemy chooses what happens next. The British answer was not perfect. It was only close. A 10-pound tube close enough to the man who saw the target. A smoke round close enough to the danger ground. A high-angle shot close enough to the fold in the earth where the enemy thought he had disappeared. That is the lesson under the medal. The question is never only how much firepower an army owns. The question is where that firepower lives when the moment arrives. In the desert west of El Alamein, a German soldier saw a British infantryman lift a little pipe and made the same mistake many trained men made. He judged the weapon by how unimpressive it looked. Then the bomb came down from above, and the platoon learned too late that the most dangerous weapon on that patch of ground was not the biggest gun. It was the one that did not have to ask permission.